In this particular session, we are supposed to discuss separation of, separation of carriage and content and open access. But as it happens in the most events, most workshops, especially when Harry is at the helm of affairs in the first session, all the important points would have been discussed. So actually I'm really wondering, is there anything for me to speak about in this particular session? So I decided actually to drop my presentation because the presentation would have been total repetition of what was discussed in the morning. I'm going to speak little extempore based on little bit of experience that I have in the sector and also of the regulatory process. I will try to focus only on the separation of carriage and content and the implementation point of view. I will not deal with the political economy. I think it's for others to decide. But if political economy permits, what would be the issue? Is it feasible to implement? How it would be implemented? The way it has been suggested in the proposed amendment bill, is it the right way to do it? So the first question first, macro overview of what exactly is separation of carriage and content. And unfortunately, it's not clear to me from reading the proposed amendments. It talks about creation of separate supply licenses. It talks about creation of separate distribution licenses. Is this what we want to do? And if this is what we want to do, why should we spend time, money and effort in doing this? What is the purpose of creating separate supply licenses and separate distribution licenses or wires licenses? So my inherent gut feeling was, when I started reading the provisions of the amendment bill, that we want to create competition. While again in the first session we discussed about it and we discussed the other side of the competition, frankly, the proposed amendments have no mention of how that competition would be created. I think one thing is very clear from the amendments, that the amendment at least intend to have one wires licensee everywhere, so one distribution licensee. How the Act would do or deal with the existing multiple distribution licenses wherever they are, like in the case of Mumbai, in the case of Jharkhand, and there is I think one more place where the multiple distribution licenses have been issued. But probably Act could take exception to this particular or these particular instances and say that all other places there will be one wires licensee and do away with. So the issue comes up, where competition? In supply business? And if supply business, how the competition would be created? So let's keep aside now the issue of the wires business and let's concentrate on the supply business. It says that there would be an intermediary company who would own the PPAs. And then there would be a supply company, and then there would be subsequent supply licenses. First of all, I am not able to understand why exactly we are creating such a structure. The Act certainly doesn't clarify that. Even assuming that you need that kind of a structure, let's ignore the part of creating intermediary company and incumbent supply licensee and subsequent supply licensee. Why those three stages are required, forget about that. What exactly we are going to achieve with that? Because at no point place it says that the PPAs which incumbent supply licensee would have or intermediary company would own will be farmed out to the multiple supply licenses. And if it is not going to be farmed out to multiple supply licenses, how there will be a competition? What would happen is that there would be a single buyer in the form of incumbent supply licensee who would own, say in the case of Maharashtra, 20,000, 25,000 megawatt of PPAs, who would be supplying electricity to the consumers. Where is the competition? The Act has not struck down Section 11, but in my opinion, Section 11 isn't that big a worry from the competition perspective, but the Section 42(2) cross subsidy is a bigger worry. because by retaining the single or the much bigger supply licensee and retaining the conditions which are related to the 42 open access and the cross subsidy surcharge, we are not effectively dealing with the problem. In fact, we are perpetuating the problem in a different format. Instead of having distribution licensee with both functions, we are creating a supply licensee with same function. So if competition is to be created, the Act has to state a couple of things. One, how this PPS would be farmed out to the multiple distribution licenses or multiple supply, not distribution, supply licenses. Important. The Act talks about one government licensee, but Act doesn't say that government licensee will be provider of last resort. In fact, the Act says the provider last resort to be appointed by the Commission from time to time, which is disastrous because the Commission cannot appoint. It can't be changed from time to time. Okay, so forget about it, and that's clearly an error in drafting. But Act has to state that that state government licensee or supply licensee will be the provider of the last resort, and whatever is required to do good loss incurred by that provider of last resort in supply electricity to the last end or lowest category consumer will be made good by the government. Now the issue, how this PPS would be farmed out, whether there could be or there should be a provision within the Act to create multiple supply licenses. And if that is to be done, if these will have to be in the private sector, whether this is a kind of a backdoor privatization of the supply business. I think all of you would agree with me that unless and until there are multiple supply licenses created out of the same existing supply business, there is not going to be any effective competition. Multiple ways of doing that. One could auction PPS. One could keep low-cost PPS for the provider of last resort government company so that the subsidy levels are managed at the beginning. Subsequent subsidy level could be managed differently. This also would reduce to a large extent the problem of compensating the POLR or provider of last resort. So these are some of the issues which have to be dealt with if the competition is to be brought in. And if the competition is not to be brought in, there is no need to do the separation of the carriage and content. Second probably important issue is the tariffs after separation. Especially tariffs after creation of the multiple supply licenses, the way I see it, because unless and until multiple supply licenses are created, there is no point in doing it. The existing provisions, because the amendment to the Act has been done in a piecemeal manner, in the sense someone thought about the separation of carriage and content, and whatever changes are required to be done has been done. It has not been done in a very holistic manner wherein you have envisaged what's going to be the new industry structure and then drafted the suitable amendments for that, because we have never seen anywhere what is going to be the new industry structure. So I presume that since the competition is to be brought in, that's the prime objective of the amendment. What would be the role of the tariff setting process, regulators in the tariff setting process? As we know, the primary job of the regulation in the current context is the tariff setting. If there are going to be multiple supply licenses and if we are able to create them effectively, do we really need this particular process to be undertaken? And if it is to be done, how it should be done? There is an existing provision in the Act under section 62 which says that wherever there are multiple distribution licenses, the ceiling tariffs shall be set by the regulator. There is a classical example of Bombay. I will not talk much about Bombay because I am one of the interested parties in this case. But as all of us know, that provision has not been used. And the regulator has been setting tariffs for each individual licensee. And actually I don't wanted to talk about this particular tariff issue, but my job has been made Easy. The tariffs have been playing havoc over here. One tariff, in the one tariff setting process, the tariffs drop down, the consumers move from one licensee to another licensee. Next, the tariff of another utility goes down, the consumers move back from one utility to another utility. As far as the consumers are concerned, it's a perfect response to the competition. If someone asks me whether the competition can succeed in electricity sector, just have a look at Bombay example. Consumers do respond to the pricing signals, and they would respond. But that raises a very important issue, whether the commission should set the tariff and manage the competition. Obviously the answer is no, because then there is no efficiency gain. The utilities are not going to fight against each other to have low cost PPAs, to be able to supply to the consumers. Then what will be the role of the regulator? Whether the ceiling tariffs would be sufficient, how the ceiling tariffs should be set. If the industry structure has to move towards multiple supply licenses, then the provisions related to the ceiling tariff will have to come in the act, at least to a certain extent. We should not make the same mistake which we made in 2003, that we should set all tariff related issues will be dealt by tariff policy, and the tariff policy, whatever way they dealt, it dealt with it even today. After 12 years of that, we are not clear exactly in which direction we are going. All provisions are being interpreted differently by the different regulatory commissions. Cross-subsidy surcharge, which was supposed to be set and go down over a period of time, was zero at the beginning and increased to such a proportion that the entire open access has become unviable. So, key provisions related to the tariff, depending on the industry structure, will have to be part of the amendment. While doing this, one issue which is going to be a stumbling block, and that's going to be the regulatory assets. Where would these regulatory assets reside? Probably the easiest answer is that those would reside with the wires licensing and done away with, so that it becomes a fixed cost of the wires licensee recovered over a period of time and given to anybody who owns that regulatory asset in the past. Subsequently, there will not be any regulatory asset towards supply business, because then actually supply is not though not delicensed, but it's in the full competitive mode. So there will be only regulatory assets with respect to the wires business, and probably would continue to be that way. The second issue related to the tariffs is cross-subsidy surcharge. If this is the industry structure which we have in mind, wherein there will be a government company which would be the provider of last resort and would probably own low-cost PPAs so as to be able to supply to the low-end consumers, there is no question of cross-subsidy surcharge. Why do you really need cross-subsidy surcharge? If you need any subsidy to be given, if you need any supply license to encourage supply to the consumers which are low end, the government will have to come out with some scheme like DBT or direct benefits transfer. It can be done. The money also can be arranged. We have got a multiple acts, tax on sale of electricity, electricity duty act, cess, all kinds of provision. So 2 paise, 4 paise, 5 paise on all sales of the all supply licenses could be collected by the government and provided for the DBT. It's possible to make subsidy payments in completely transparent manner. What is needed is that clarity in the structure, what exactly we are. If we are going to auction the PPAs to the supply licensees to be able to supply to the end consumers, then the money from auctions would come. If the PPA is to be given on some other parameters, the money could be collected by way of the surcharge over a period of say 5 years to be set at the beginning as a part of the transfer scheme. So we need to have that clarity in the act itself. Now 2 more issues remaining. One is metering and loss reduction. There has been confusion. Who will have metering? In Indian context, at least I wouldn't go for a UK kind of a scheme where there is a competitive metering. I will go for a metering with the wires licensee. Wires licensee has to be made responsible for the distribution losses on his wires. And that would not happen if the metering is in any other person's scope. So the wires licensee has to install meters, has to be responsible for meters. So then comes the question, if the supply licensee wants to innovate, wants to come up with something like prepaid meters, come up with some kind of a TOD schemes which are not earlier envisaged, give some kind of a free electricity during certain periods depending on his PPAs, yes, then the supply licensee would have to install his own meter. And the two meters will have to agree as far as the accounting of the supply licenses business is concerned. It will happen on the meters which have been installed by the wires meters. The last issue, also very important, and again there is a confusion in the proposed amendments, is that who would be the interface to the consumer? At some places it gives impression that the wires licensee would be responsible for the connectivity and the supply licensee would be responsible for the supply. And in my opinion, I think this is duplication. We should not harass the consumer because we want to bring in competition. The responsibility for the consumer interaction should squarely rest on the supply licensee. Whosoever is the supply licensee would interact with the consumer, would get necessary wires licensee to come bring the wires to the consumer and provide electricity to that particular consumer. So I will stop over here. These are my views on the separation of carriage and content. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time. I would like to leave by around 1:15. So if Mr. Dhol permits, if there are any questions, I would like to take them right away, and then I would like to leave. Mr. Zante.
Talked about auctioning of PPAs, but if you see the distribution licensing generally, the cost of supply is more than the average tariff that is realized by the distribution licensee. So if you are going to auction the PPA, the incoming licensees will try to have the average tariff more than the cost of supply. So ultimately, what is going to happen is the average tariff being charged to the consumers is going to go up. So it being politically sensitive, do you really think that auctioning of PPA is a viable option?
Okay. I haven't explained fully the scheme, what I mean by exactly auctioning of the PPAs. You are not going to auction all the PPAs. Okay. The PPAs which are required to supply electricity to the low-end consumers will have to stay with the provider of last resort or the government company that would be. As I said, if the aim is to create competition, the multiple supply licenses have to come out of the existing business, not out of incremental business. So how do you get multiple supply licenses in the existing business? So existing PPAs have to be distributed among the different set of people to create multiple supply licenses in the state. How do you do that? You just can't give away some PPAs to X, some PPAs to Y. So there has to be a process. So one of the process could be PPAs, auctioning of PPAs, and depending on ability. So the premium could be say 1 paise or 2 paise or maybe 1 rupee, 2 rupee, I don't know. Okay, if the coal auctions are any indication, one need not assume that the results would be, negative. So that's what my answer would be. I'm not talking about the auctioning all the PPAs available with so the state government will have to be given the power to decide which PPAs to auction, whom to auction, how the multiple supply licenses would be created. Okay, thanks.
While Mr. Zalte is setting up, I have a question. You said there's lack of clarity on, I know it's a repeat question, but if you can throw some more light on how do you think this is going to go forward, because they want to bring in the ordinance within the next week or 10 days in this session of Parliament. The Electricity Act, I'm told, they want to bring the ordinance even to the standing committee, has not been asked for their comments, because the member was kind enough to share that they're moving suo moto for comments. So how does this process work, since you have the experience?
See, man, I think it's premature to bring out an ordinance on the lines of the current amendments which have been shared with us. At least to me, I have not been able to understand what's going to be the ultimate structure. I don't know in what directions each commission would move or each state government would move, looking at this particular draft amendment. So the understanding which was given by the chairperson of the standing committee in one of the interactions in last couple of weeks is that, there are at least couple of months available for standing committee to deliberate, and then some action would take place. So I really don't think this current draft is in a shape or condition to be enacted as an ordinance, and the sector would move in any particular direction after that.